crewed by regular folks from the world over, lawyers, doctors, nurses, teachers, and so on. What was used against the boats, but a series of quadcopters were flying very close to the boats and dropped onto several vessels what looked like flashbangs, very loud noise, very bright lights, often used to disorientate and to intimidate. And then, of course, the communications line was jammed. The VHF radio, which is used for emergency communications, started playing music by the Swedish band ABBA. We believe that this might well be due to the peculiar fixation of the
live pictures coming to us from inside the UN right now as we are hearing on this issue of the aid flotilla. The UN is demanding a probe into these reported attacks, these drone attacks taking place on the flotilla off the coast of Crete. So that's just come to us from New York, from the UN. They would like and are demanding a probe into these attacks on the Gaza aid flotilla. But the delegates are gathering. They are going to get underway in about 10 minutes' time, we understand, with King of Spain first to address the assembly today, followed by President Zelensky. So we will certainly bring that to you live here on BBC News. But let's show you something else that happened yesterday. So much security around, of course, protecting world leaders. And it's emerged that France's President Macron had to call in a favour after he became stuck because of President Trump's motorcade. Have a look.
Who is this actually? How many people?
No, I have 10 people with me. So I go to the French embassy.
No. I'm sorry, President. I'm really sorry. It's just that everything's frozen right now. There's a motorcade coming right. That's why. I'm sorry.
So Mr. Macron called a friend. He picked up his phone and rang President Trump.
How are you? Guess what? I'm waiting the street because everything is frozen for you.
Some negotiations with the police. He was allowed to continue his journey, but on foot this time. He couldn't take his car. It was a half-hour walk to the French embassy. Mr. Macron, not the only street by police. So traffic chaos, things at a standstill in New York yesterday. More from the UN coming up. I hope you can stay with us. Bye-bye.
In Sweden, at the world's biggest sorting plant for plastic packaging. Dubbed Site Zero, it's on a mission to boost recycling rates.
We sort out 12 different types of plastics. That's also a world record. If we are able to sort every plastic separately, we can then recycle them separately, and thereby saving a lot of emissions from incineration and at the same time from virgin material.
This is where it all starts. Packaging is sent here from households across Sweden, as well as Norway and Finland.
We receive 2 trucks every hour, so that's about 40 tons.
It's a little bit smelly in here. Do you get used to it eventually?
Actually, you do, because I don't think it's smelly.
Crisp packets, chocolate wrappers and food containers fly along a maze of crisscrossing conveyor belts, 6.5 kilometres of them, and go through dozens of these machines, sorting 1,000 packages every second. The waste is sorted mechanically. Inside this drum, packages are first sorted by size.
It's a bit like the inside of a giant tumble dryer.
Then inside 60 machines like this one, infrared readers, cameras, lasers and sensors identify the different plastic polymers.
The first step in our process is the mechanical sorting, and the next phase is the optical sorting, where we actually find out which type of plastics are going through the line.
Light bars hit the package and bounce the spectrum back to this orange box. Then precision air jets push out specific types of plastic, while AI helps coordinate cameras and lasers to locate hard-to-detect black packaging. In less than half an hour, those bundles of plastic waste are separated. It's then shipped off to specialist recycling plants around Europe.
For instance, if you take this detergent bottle, we send them to a recycler. And once they receive it, they shred it in flakes like this. You can make a granulate out of it, and a detergent bottle.
But not all the plastic can be recycled. There isn't a market or the technology yet to reuse it all.
At the moment, recycle about 50% of the plastic packaging that we are receiving.
Here in Scandinavia, the rubbish that isn't recycled is often burned to generate heat and electricity for homes instead. However, plastic recycling also has its critics.
Now, there are environmental groups who would argue that this recycling is a distraction from the root cause of the problem, that we just need to use less plastic in the first place.
In some cases, we could definitely use less plastics, and I totally support that. But we will never, in the short or maybe long term, get rid of all plastics.
To boost recycling rates, other countries are building new sorting plants and using Site Zero as a blueprint.
thousands of people have come here to the centre of Seoul this evening. They have come to celebrate the newly elected president, Lee Jae-myung.
He's been firing rubber bullets at the direction of the crowd, and it shows you just how volatile the situation is.
We're seeing scenes of destruction like this one across Mandalay, and the reality on the ground is there just aren't enough pairs of hands.
Given the scale of the attacks we've seen over the past 48 hours, it doesn't feel like we're in ceasefire territory.
There when the story breaks. BBC News.
Live from London, I'm Lucy Hawkins.
And I'm Katrina Perry, live at the United Nations in New York. This is BBC News. President Zelensky will address the General Assembly shortly, a day after live pictures here from the UN as world leaders are gathering for day 2.
In other news, overwhelmed and on the brink of collapse, we speak to some of the doctors providing what help they can in Gaza City's last functioning hospital.
A mass murder, a killing, a torture, a nightmare, and there's no painkillers as well.
Every couple of hours, there's multiple amputation cases where massive resuscitation is life or limb, literally.
And a major breakthrough in the treatment of Huntington's disease. For the first time, a gene therapy has been shown to slow progression of the condition. Hello everyone, it's another significant day ahead at the United Nations in New York, where shortly President Zelensky will address the General Assembly. And adding to the importance, the change in position from President Trump yesterday. He now says he believes Ukraine could win the war with Russia. President Zelensky welcoming what he called a major shift in Donald Trump's position. We've been looking at some live pictures as the day starts in New York, world leaders gathering and delegates as well for day 2. Other speakers today, the interim Syrian president, Ahmed al-Shara. He is the first Syrian president to address the General Assembly in 60 years. Iran's president, Spain's king, also in the lineup today. But let's take you to my colleague Katrina Perry, who is there for us again in New York at the UN. Another big day, Katrina.
It really is, Lucy, and all of the speakers that you just mentioned there, those world leaders, that's where all the focus is today. A lot of anticipation around what the Syrian interim president will say. He's walked past us here many times over the last couple of days, surrounded by a huge entourage and a big expectation ahead of what he's going to say. You mentioned the supreme leader of Iran as well. Sanctions on Iran, but this morning, all eyes on the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. President Trump, in his address yesterday, in his formal address, didn't really criticize Russia too much. Gave, a more of a dressing down to European leaders for not putting sanctions on Russia in a way that he wants to. But the real comments came afterwards, after he had met President Zelensky. President Zelensky describing those comments you outlined from President Trump as a game changer. So we expect to hear a little bit more from him along that theme here when he's on the world stage addressing the UN General Assembly. Well, let's talk a little bit more about what lies ahead with my colleague here, our North America correspondent, Neda Tawfiq. Neda, just on what President Zelensky is going to say here,
presumably part of that is going to be making his appeal for more help for Ukraine.
Absolutely, and more international pressure on Russia. That was really one of his key messages at a Security Council meeting just yesterday, essentially saying that the UN really needs to step up. He was critical of the United Nations in his last address here at the General Assembly, talking about how ineffective it was, how the Security Council was paralyzed, how Russia, as a permanent member of the Security Council, was the one, of course, of the aggressor in Ukraine, and how the international community, including Russia's allies, China, for example, needed to kind of come on to Ukraine's side to get a swift end to this war, because, of course, it has been dragging on for years now, despite President Zelensky talking about Donald Trump's shift in tone being a game changer. Well, unless that's met with some material change of the U.S. or NATO's involvement, it just looks like this war is going to continue to drag on. And while President Trump does seem to be dissatisfied with Vladimir Putin, Russia's president, he kept emphasizing that the EU and NATO could really help Ukraine get back all of its territory, not really stepping in to say what else the U.S. would do.
And on the other, one of the other major points that we'll be looking at for here today, the interim president of Syria, Ahmed al-Shara, due to make an address. What is the expectation around that?
Look, this is the first time in over 50 years that a Syrian president is going to be addressing the UN General Assembly. And there is a lot to take in here. I mean, President Ahmed al-Shara came. Of course, the United States, with the help of Saudi Arabia, kind of arranging a meeting in May between al-Shara and Trump, he was able to get the U.S. to lift some sanctions. There are still some sanctions that Congress, he would like them to lift. Trump called him a tough, attractive guy. He had a bilateral meeting with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, yesterday, where they talked about regional security. So that's clearly a focus of the United States. So for al-Shara, it is about trying to get sanctions lifted. He, needs to reinvigorate the economy in Syria. That is a huge issue. How he addresses some of the sectarian divides, you can't just paper over the, 13 plus year civil war. Syria was under, of course, Ahmed al-Shara is part of the Sunni majority in the country, but there has been, violence against the Druze and Alawite minorities. The UN says it's some of his troops that were involved in some of that violence. And then, of course, there is the, relationship there, the issues between Israel and Syria. There is the UN buffer zone, the Golan Heights, right after al-Shara kind of came in and overthrew President Assad. Israel went into the Golan Heights and occupied that territory, summons. So we're going to see if a deal is possible between Israel and Syria on that area. So a lot people will be waiting for it
to
hear that
many other world leaders to address the stage here. We'll be talking to you about that a little bit later on. Now, lots more from here at the UN in New York in just a few moments. But Lucy, you've got some breaking news there.
Yeah, Katrina, we'll be back to you in a moment with more as we build up to President Zelensky addressing the UN. But some breaking news coming to us from Texas, from Dallas. We can actually show you some live pictures we're getting in from there at the moment. Now, this is just a traffic camera, but you can see traffic at a total standstill there and many of those cars being diverted. And that is because we are hearing that 3 people had been wounded in a shooting, but this happened at a federal Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office, an ICE office. Police responding to this in the northwest of Dallas at about 7:30 in the morning, and you can see lots of traffic being diverted there and things at a standstill. Homeland Security saying there were multiple injuries and fatalities, but that the shooter is deceased, a self-inflicted gunshot wound there, so the shooter is dead. Found dead on the roof of a nearby building, we understand from local media. And the ICE acting director, Todd Lyons, has been speaking to local media saying the preliminary information they have is that it was a possible sniper. So 3 people wounded. Some reports from Texas local media saying they are in a critical condition. We've not had any formal reaction from ICE itself, nor have we had anything from the police. But you can see a lot of hold-ups there in the northwest of Dallas after 3 people have been wounded in a shooting. The shooter is now dead, but at a federal immigration and customs enforcement office in the city. So any developments on that, we will bring them straight to you. That I'm sure across all of the US networks at the moment as well, Katrina. But will be President Zelensky. What are we expecting from the president? It will be a big moment for him.
It will, yes. I think we might just have a listen in, though, to Don Felipe VI, the King of Spain, who's speaking right now.
Shape behaviours to which the vast majority of international actors adhere. Even when they are breached, they are the voice of reason used in international relations. They are the best defense against the law of the strongest. A world without rules is uncharted territory. A time without rules is returning to the Middle Ages. The path proposed by the United Nations Charter is fraught with obstacles, and will never be fully completed. That is why the example of those who have been committed to its values is so precious. These are people working under extreme conditions, risking their freedom, their physical integrity, or even their lives. We see this in Europe, in Ukraine, where war has been unleashed by Russia's unprovoked and unjustifiable aggression, violating the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Peace in Europe will not be possible without justice and accountability. Spain will continue to support all efforts aimed at achieving a just and lasting peace, grounded in the principles of international law, respect for human rights, and accountability. We also see this in its full severity in the Middle East, in Palestine, in the Gaza Strip. We cannot remain silent or look away from the devastation, the bombings, including of hospitals, schools, and places of refuge. In light of the countless civilian death, famine, starvation, the forced displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. To what end? These are abhorrent acts that stand in stark contrast to everything that this forum represents. They offend human conscience and shame the entire international community. Spain is a nation deeply proud of its Sephardic roots. When we speak to the people of Israel, we speak to a people of brothers and sisters, a people who, when they return to Spain, to Cordoba, Toledo, Seville, Barcelona, and so many other places, come home. This was the spirit behind the 2015 law, which was passed with broad consensus, granting Spanish nationality to descendants of Sephardic Jews originally from Spain. It is for this reason, and it is so difficult for us to understand, that we implore, we demand, stop this massacre now. No more deaths in the name of a people that is so wise and ancient, who have suffered so greatly throughout history. Let us be clear. We unequivocally condemn the heinous terrorism of Hamas, especially the brutal massacre of the 7th of October 2023 against the Israeli population. And we recognize Israel's right to self-defense. But with equal strength, we demand that the Israeli government fully uphold international humanitarian law throughout Gaza and the West Bank. We demand that humanitarian aid be delivered without delay, that a ceasefire be established with guarantees, and that all hostages still held by Hamas be released immediately. The international community must shoulder its responsibility to achieve as soon as possible a viable solution that would include the existence of two states. The recognition of the state of Palestine by an increasing number of member states of this organization, to which Spain added its voice this past May, must contribute to achieving a just and definitive regional peace based on the implementation of United Nations resolutions and on the universal delegates. As we know, many conflicts are both caused by and result in resource scarcity, state fragility, and inequality. The gap between current realities and the fulfillment of the 2030 Agenda remains vast, and the current funding shortfall for sustainable development exceeds $4 trillion per year. The call for efficiency and resource optimization made at the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development that we held recently in Seville must be sustained. Accordingly, Spain, in line with the consensus-based commitment adopted there, has launched the Seville Plan for Support to Multilateralism. We have increased our contributions to international development funds, and we have reaffirmed our commitment to defending human rights, gender equality, and the environmental transition, which are central and distinctive elements of our foreign policy. Allow me to briefly address each of these three areas. First, human rights. Spain is, as of this year, a member of the Human Rights Council, enabling us to continue advancing causes such as the fight against racism, the abolition of the death penalty, and the promotion of economic, social, and cultural rights, while at the same time persisting in the struggle against all forms of discrimination. Because we support plural, open societies in which all citizens participate, and we are concerned by the erosion of democracies, the growing disaffection.
King Don Felipe VI, the King of Spain, the first speaker at the UN General Assembly, day 2 of the debate there. A big focus of his remarks so far on the situation in Gaza and in the West Bank, saying the world has put them in a place where he said, we are so pained by the actions of Israel. We cry out to them to stop this action, to work towards a ceasefire, and he called on Hamas also to release the hostages immediately. King Felipe continuing there. We'll keep an ear across what he's saying, but I want to bring in a guest who's standing here beside me, waiting patiently, Alain Berset, the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, and of course, former President of Switzerland. Thank you very much for being here with us. Listening to King Felipe there talking about how the world cannot look away from what's happening in Gaza, and we heard so many speakers say that yesterday and indeed the day before at the Two-State Solution Summit. But yet the Secretary General says Israel is so clearly flouting the laws of humanitarian law, flouting the rules. What can be done? What can the leaders here do other than just talk?
I mean, to seek the situation and to speak, to see this tragedy that's happening in the whole region with the hostages, with the killings of civilians, Palestinian civilians, with starvation. It's impossible to look away, but at the same time, it's really difficult to act and to have really a result. I mean, we must all together say what we want to achieve. Ceasefire must be the goal. Full access to humanitarian aid, release of all hostages. But first of all, the most important is also to have then a credible political process. And we need to see this credible political process. And I think as a General Assembly, this is a very important moment in that sense.
Where is the accountability? I mean, the Secretary General referenced rulings from the ICJ. We had a report just out last week from another UN body saying that Israel had met 4 of the 5 criteria for genocide.
And it's really important never to accept, that such a situation will prevail without to have one day also to Ukraine. Ukraine. We are not able to deliver exactly on this for Gaza and for the region, but it is really, it must be a goal for the whole international community. We must decide in which world we want to live. And it must be, I mean, the best option is it must be in a world where accountability and rule of law will prevail. In that sense, for the region, it means also, the Geneva Convention, it means the full access to humanitarian aid, to respect international law, and if not, then to have consequences.
Is there a role specifically for the Council of Europe there? I mean, Israel obviously isn't a member, but it does have observer status for the Parliamentary Assembly.
For the Parliamentary Assembly. You know, for the Council of Europe, we have 46 member states. And 30 member states recognized the state of Palestine. That's an important step. I mean, we see, and it means this: we see the two-state solution as only way to make a good, positive step forward in the whole region. That's the first element. Second element: we are an organization standing for human rights, rule of law, and democracy. And if we stand for human rights, it is not possible just to look away because it is not on our territory. You know, we have a lot to do with the 46 member states, Council of Europe, but the human rights, they don't know borders. I mean, they are universal. And that's why I was also very early speaking on this and recalling that it is not acceptable not to respect the human rights. To have this evolution for all of us, and we need now really to recall this and to make it real.
Now, you mentioned Ukraine just there a moment ago. We're awaiting President Zelensky's address to the Assembly here. He was here yesterday talking about the Ukrainian children that have been abducted by Russia, also the treatment of those who are living in Russian-occupied territories. Have you been able to seek accountability there?
We do the maximum on this. You know, Ukraine is a member state of the Council of Europe, and with the 45 other member states and with others who are working exactly on this accountability. We have on everyday basis the European Court on Human Rights addressing the cases and taking decision, adjudicating cases of violations of human rights in the context of the war. We have the register of damage. We will develop this now in the Claims Commission to have a good body, to have a good ground to ensure reconstruction and recovery also for Ukrainian people. And the third element is about the special tribunal. I signed for the Council of Europe in June with President Zelensky an agreement between Council of Europe and Ukraine to develop a special tribunal addressing the crime of aggression. We are ready, we stand ready, we need now support to do this, and it is exactly also in the direction of accountability for Ukraine.
Okay. Alain Berset, the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News. Lots more is still to come. Do stay with us. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Researchers say they've successfully treated one of the cruelest and most devastating diseases, Huntington's, for the first time. It runs through families, relentlessly kills brain cells, and resembles a combination of dementia, Parkinson's, and motor neuron disease. The trial was shown to slow the progress of the disease by 75%. Our medical editor, Fergus Walsh, has the story.
Jack May Davis knows that without treatment, he is guaranteed to develop the same relentless condition as killed his father, Huntington's disease. Caused by a faulty gene, it destroys brain cells and affects the whole body. Jack's father, Fred, first developed symptoms in his late 30s and eventually needed round-the-clock care. He died aged 54.
Yeah, it was really, really awful. and just horrible to see, and horrible to know.
Look here, you can see.
But now there is hope. A trial of a gene therapy slowed the progression of Huntington's disease by 75% over 3 years. Scientists involved in the research at University College London described the results as spectacular.
I am absolutely thrilled and excited that we now have a potential treatment for this truly devastating disorder. And what the data means is that for a person who has Huntington's disease, they will be able to maintain their function longer. They'll be able to stay and work longer. They'll be able to support their families longer. They'll be able to be independent. So it will give them more years of living a good quality of life.
Here you can see the gene therapy being injected deep into the brain of one of the 29 patients on the trial. The surgery takes more than 12 hours, but is a one-off treatment. The drug, called AMT-130, enters cells in the brain, releasing its genetic material. This lowers levels of a toxic protein and slows progress of the disease. This gene therapy represents a stunning breakthrough in Huntington's disease. It is rare to see such dramatic and convincing results from any medical trial, and there is hope that this experimental treatment will be licensed perhaps as soon as next year.
And so here is a picture of your brain, which I'm pleased to tell you looks fantastic.
Jack, who's 30, is part of...
We leave that medical breakthrough. There's more on that on the BBC News website to take you to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressing the UN General Assembly.
Isn't much different from the past. If a nation wants peace, it still has to work on weapons. It's sick, but that's the reality, not excellencies. You know perfectly well international law doesn't work fully unless you have powerful friends who are truly willing to stand up for it. And even that doesn't work without weapons. It's terrible, but without it, things would be even worse. There are no security guarantees except friends and weapons. No Ukrainian choice this kind of reality. And knowing our people, they would have chosen a different priority. Ukrainians are peaceful people, but they are people who want to live freely in their own independent country. That's why we invest in defense. For many nations, there is simply no other way left. Nations can speak about their pain from stages like this, but even during bloodshed, there isn't a single international institution that can truly stop it. That's how weak these institutions have become. What can Sudan or Somalia or Palestine or any other people living through war really expect from the UN or the global system? For decades, just statements and statements. And even everything happening in Gaza remains without a way out. Even now, Syria, after all the changes, still has to appeal to the world to ease the sanctions that are choking its economy. It has to ask and wait. Syria deserves stronger support from the international community. And as Russia's war against my country goes on, people are still dying every week. Yet there is no Ukrainian children, and we have brought some of them back. And I thank everyone who's helped. But how long will it take to bring all of them home? Childhood slips away faster than adults are able to help. Look at Israel. Nearly 2 years have passed and hostages still haven't been freed. They must be freed, but even that still hasn't happened. And for years, there have been no real answers to other threats, either chemical weapons and famine used as a weapon. Last year, at this assembly, I warned the world about the risk of radiation disasters, especially due to Russia's occupations of our Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the biggest in Europe, but nothing's changed. Nothing's. And yesterday, the plant went into blackout again, and Russia hasn't stopped shelling even in areas near a nuclear facility. And because of international institutions are too weak, this madness continues. Even being part of a long-standing military alliance doesn't automatically mean you are safe. Just recently, 19 simple Russian drones violated Polish airspace, and only 4 were shut down. Luckily, they were not Shaheeds or even worse. Otherwise, the results would have in history, because Russian fighter jets deliberately entered its airspace. Moldova is defending itself again from Russia's interference. We are helping Moldova, and Russia's trying to do to Moldova what Iran once did to Lebanon. And the global response, again, not enough. We have already lost Georgia in Europe. Human rights and the European nature of the state system are only shrinking there. Georgia is dependent on Russia. And for many, many years, Belarus has also been moving toward dependence on Russia. Europe cannot afford to lose Moldova too. It's important to remember how the world once ignored the need to help Georgia after Russia's attack, and how the moment was missed with Belarus. How Moldova must not be lost. And for Europe, supporting Moldova's stability is not costly, but failing to do so will come at a much higher price. That's why the EU needs to help Moldova now with funding and energy support, not just words or political gesture. We must not forget about protecting the rights of people and the rights of nations in regions where these rights are under threat. The UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights must apply everywhere. But the Taliban in Afghanistan dragged a whole country back into the dark ages. Cartels in some Latin America countries are more powerful than the government there. This is all about collapse of international law and the weakness of the international institutions. And so it's about the rise of... Yesterday, President Trump stood right here in this hall, and God saved him from a murder attempt during the campaign. A shot was fired from a rifle, and just a fraction of an inch saved his life. Just days ago, President, along with hundreds of thousands of Americans, honored the memory of Charlie Kirk. Sadly, his life was cut short by a bullet. Once again, violence with a rifle in hand. We also mourn the Ukrainian woman, Irina Zarutska. She was brutally killed with a knife here in America, the very country where she was seeking refuge from Russia's war. And almost every day when we open the news, we see headlines about violent attacks happening all around the world. Most of it is done with weapons. People are already used to, but weapons are evolving faster than our ability to defend ourselves. Now, there are tens of thousands of people who know how to professionally kill using drones. Stopping that kind of attack is harder. It's war. It used to be that only the strongest countries could use drones because they were expensive and complex. Now even simple drones can fly thousands of kilometers. War tech doesn't care about geography anymore. It's now reshaping it. Just recently, airports in Europe had to shut down because of drones. Authorities couldn't even say what kind of drones they were, who sent them, or from where. Last week, North Korea announced the test of a tactical strike drone. That means even countries with limited resources can now build weapons that are dangerous to their neighbors. Ukraine and nations like Saudi Arabia know all too well how dangerous Iranian attack drones are. But what happens when all the types of drones become available, even to small terrorist groups or cartels? The world moves too slowly to protect itself, and weapons move fast. Now companies are already working on drones that can shoot down other drones, and it's only a matter of time. Not much before drones are fighting drones, attacking critical infrastructure and targeting people all by themselves, fully autonomous and no human involved, except the few who control AI systems. Dear leaders, we are now living through the most destructive arms race in human history, because this time includes artificial intelligence. And if the world can't respond even to old threats, and if there is no strong platform for international security, will there be any place left on Earth that's still safe for people? We need global rules now for how AI can be used in weapons, and this is just as urgent as preventing the spread of nuclear weapons. We need to restore international cooperation, real working cooperation for peace and for security. A few years from now might already be too late. 10 years ago, war looked different, and no one imagined that cheap drones could create dead zones, areas stretching for dozens of kilometers where nothing moves, no vehicles, no life. People used to imagine that only after a nuclear strike. Now it's drawn reality. Mass-produced, simple drones, and without AI yet. Ukraine doesn't have drone that can fly up to 2,000-3,000 kilometers. We had no choice but to build them to protect our right to life. Control over the sea used to depend on having a big navy. Ukraine doesn't have a big fleet, but we succeeded. In the Black Sea, we pushed what's left of the Russian navy into remote base. And we did it with sea drones. That's how we protect our ports, maritime trade routes, because Russia has left us no other choice. And our Spiderweb operation, when cheap drones destroyed or damaged dozens of expensive Russian strategic bombers, became a real example for special forces around the world of what new weapons can do to old systems. These very Russian bombers attacked our cities. And none of this would have happened if Putin had not started this full-scale aggression, full-scale war. And every year that this war goes on, weapons become even more deadly. And only Russia deserves to be blamed for this. Dear leaders, to protect lives, Ukraine builds underground schools and underground hospitals. To protect lives, we have to spend more on protecting power stations from drone and missile attacks than on building sports facilities or cultural infrastructure. Ukrainian farmers are learning how to protect their equipment from Russia's FPV drone. Russia's war has put us in this situation, but do you have protection against similar threats? The facts are simple. Stopping this war now, and with it, the global arms race, is cheaper than building underground kindergartens or massive bunkers for critical infrastructure later. Stopping Putin now is cheaper than trying to protect every port and every ship from terrorists with sea drones. Stopping Russia now is cheaper than wondering who will be the first to create a simple drone carrying a nuclear warhead. So we must use everything we have together to force the aggressor to stop. And only then do we have a real chance that this arms race will not end in catastrophe for all of us. And it must be done now. Otherwise, Putin will keep driving the war forward wider and deeper. And we told you before, Ukraine is only the first. And now Russian drones are already flying across Europe. And Russian operations are already spreading across countries. And Putin wants to continue this war by expanding it. And no one can feel safe right now. So first, we are now building a new security architecture for ourselves. More than 30 countries are already part of our coalition. And we are strengthening army, launching joint weapons production with partners and defining financial commitments for defense in a way that could become a security model for any other nation. If security guarantees work for Ukraine, something more than just friends and weapons, it will mean that people were able to make national security not a privilege for a few nations, but a right for everyone. Second, we are ready to make our modern weapons become your modern security, your modern weapon. And we have decided to open up arms export. These are powerful systems tested in a real war when every international institution failed. And we are also ready to grow our defense production together with strong partners so that their protection is modern and reliable. You don't need to start this race from scratch. We're ready to share what has already proven itself in real defense. And third, many in the world are still relaxed. Still. But look at how many countries are here at this General Assembly. Countries that are at war, or just came out of war, or are trying to stop one, or openly getting ready, has nothing to do with you. So it depends on you. Whether you help peace or continue trading with Russia and helping Russia to fund this war, it depends on you. Whether prisoners of war will be freed, whether abducted children will come home, whether hostages will be free, it depends on you what will define existence. War like now, or our joint strong actions as it should be. Yesterday we had a good meeting with President Trump, and I also spoke with many other strong leaders, and together we can change a lot. Of course, we are doing everything to make sure Europe truly helps. And of course, we count on the United States. I appreciate the support we are receiving. Yes, much depends on the G7 and G20, but in the end, peace depends on all of us, on the United Nations. So don't stay silent while Russia keeps dragging this war on. Please speak out and condemn it. Please join us in defending life and international law and order. People are waiting for action.
President Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, there just concluding his address to the United Nations General Assembly. He spoke for more or less 15 or 16 minutes, keeping to time there, and ending with that very strong plea to all of the leaders gathered in the room there not to stay silent, he said, while people are waiting for action. A very, very clear message to the leaders there about the importance of weapons to Ukraine. He painted a very dark picture, as he sees it, of what may lie ahead if the Russian invasion into Ukraine isn't stopped now, saying that stopping Putin now is cheaper than a future situation trying to protect every ship at sea subject to attack from sea drones. Stopping Russia now, he said, is cheaper than having to deal with the fleet of nuclear submarines in the future. He said the modern arms race that is underway, powered by artificial intelligence, will end in catastrophe if it's not stopped. And he said it takes weapons, it must be done, and it must be done now. He also was quite critical of the United Nations at the beginning of the speech, notwithstanding his call to action at the end, saying that for any nation currently at war, be it Ukraine, be it Gaza, be it Sudan, be it Afghanistan, he said, name-checking all of those countries, that if your nation is at war, he said, national security shouldn't be the privilege of just a few rich nations. It should be the right and entitlement of all nations. Again, calling on the member states here to help him and to help Ukraine. And he also made a particular plea to the European Union, indeed, to support Moldova. He said Georgia is very dependent on Russia. Belarus is moving towards dependence on Russia. And if the EU does not take action, then Moldova will do the same. Failing to, he said, supporting Moldovan stability now is not costly, but failing to do so will come at a higher price. He also spoke about the threat of a nuclear catastrophe in Ukraine, and he said Russia continues to attack the Zaporizhzhia power plant, the biggest power plant in Europe. He said only yesterday it went into breakout again, and he says he's been warning constantly about the risk there, and he said he needs protections there. He said being part of military alliances doesn't automatically mean that you're safe, and he listed out all the recent incursions that we've been discussing here over the last few days and weeks into Estonian airspace by those fighter jets, and also the drones that were shot down over Poland and that had been seen over Romania as well. And he also called on the United Nations to empower other countries to be swifter in the action that it takes, pointing specifically to sanctions and making a is here. We'll hear from him a little bit later, but he had come here to beg the world to lift the sanctions that are strangling his nation. And also, quite interestingly, along that criticism that he was making, that theme that he had about national security and protection being the privilege of wealthy nations, and again criticizing the United Nations, he says international humanitarian law and international law doesn't work unless you have powerful friends to stand up for it, and unless you have weapons. And he said quite specifically there are no security guarantees for Ukraine right now other than France and weapons. He said that sentence a couple of times, very pointedly making it, I think, towards the US, notwithstanding other comments he made about the good conversations that he had with the United States. And he was very quick to point out that he appreciates all of that help, because we know what happened earlier in the year when the Trump administration accused him of not being grateful in the Oval Office. So he said that he was, but ultimately into the future. He said in bloodshed, there's no international institution currently that can stop that. He said that is how weak the United Nations has become. And as I mentioned already, he singled out Afghanistan, Sudan, Palestine and Syria for what is happening there. So a very strong critique. He also appealed for help as the issues we were discussing a little bit earlier around the human rights abuses that are taking place in Ukraine perpetrated by Europe. He called for help by Russia, He called for the Ukrainian children who have been abducted by Russia to be returned. He said their childhoods were being stolen, and he said childhoods were stolen faster than the international community could act to save them. So many points there for President Zelensky. We'll be discussing them right throughout the day, and indeed in just a few moments. Plenty more still to come. Do stay with us. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Was always on in the Mashiri house, and my dream actually was to be a BBC News presenter. I want to be for others what the BBC was for us, a trusted source of stability and hope. For me, trust is about presence, about fostering relationships all around the world over years. So when a story breaks, we're not chasing a lead, we're already there. I'm Marianne Mashiri on The World Today for BBC News.
Welcome back to BBC News. I'm Lucy Hockings in London. We'll be back with Katrina in New York shortly, but an update to bring you of what we're hearing from Dallas and Texas. Of the Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, said there had been multiple injuries and fatalities. She's been posting on social media, said the suspected shooter, the attacker, had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound and that their motive was so far unknown. Now, what is not clear yet is whether those hit were immigration enforcement staff or whether it was detainees. In fact, in the last minute or so, we have had an update from officials in Texas. We can now tell you that one person has actually died and two have been wounded in this attack. So we did know that some of the injuries were life-threatening when the news first broke an hour or so ago, but we're now hearing one person has died, two have been wounded in this attack in Dallas. These are live pictures that we're getting from there. A huge police cordon blocking off the roads. We saw some traffic cameras earlier just showing traffic being diverted and the police on the scene, ambulances as well. So one person dead, two wounded in this attack on an ICE centre, an immigration centre in the northwest of Dallas. Let's return. We can take you to Kyiv. James Waterhouse was listening in as well. James, what's the most significant thing that you heard President Zelensky say to delegates?
Well, as we've seen him before, he has dialed up the urgency when he has been in a global state like this. He talked about how weapons have evolved to such a lethal level because of the war, and then he sort of pivoted into the cell, where he talked about potential cooperation with Western allies, with weapons production. And you could see he was trying to sort of say, look, we have to spend money on underground schools, underground homes, shelters, rather than building whole new towns and the rest of it. So he was clearly trying to secure more support, as well as convince the broad audience there that this war is something worth backing on the Ukrainian side. But he also referenced Donald Trump's other considerations, like the murder of Charlie Kirk, like his own assassination attempt. So I think he was also trying to resonate with the US president as well.
And James, he had the whole world, as it were, in the room, listening to every word he said. He really was trying to kind of widen the threat that Russia represents as well, talking about potential Russian threats to not just Poland and Estonia.
Bring home the urgency to his European friends. He talked about the incursions where you had 19 drones shot down in Poland, where you had 3 Russian fighter jets fly into Estonian airspace, both countries calling for an urgent meeting of NATO members. And then you have Moldova, where there's evidence of Russian interference there in the upcoming elections. His argument was that you don't want these countries to fall the same way as Georgia, where a conservative government there is increasingly aligning itself with Moscow. So he's trying to draw these parallels, as well as continue to build the case for his own continued defence.
In the final moments of his speech, President Zelensky said he had a good meeting with President Trump, and we've been talking about that throughout the day, James. But in Kyiv, is there a worry that despite the warm words from President Trump and the pivot from him to fully supporting Ukraine in the way that he did, it doesn't come with any other guarantees of more money or more weapons?
No, it doesn't. And that is something politically he will try to convert. But, you know, we've been back here after many weeks in Kyiv, and what strikes you is the drone attacks being worse than they've ever been. We see hundreds launched every night. We see air defences stretched. We see a familiar story in the eastern Donetsk region. You know, we were looking to travel to some of these eastern cities that we've been to frequently in the past. And now they are almost too dangerous to get to. Such has been the nature of Russia's advance, and now they are now sort of pounding these cities like Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. There was even a coal mine we've been to that had been destroyed. Zelensky's political efforts.
James, good to see you. James Waterhouse there with that analysis for us from Kyiv. We'll be back with Katrina very shortly. She is live for us outside the UN headquarters in New York, and Matthew is here next as well. Bye-bye.
girl who walked into the BBC in 1999 as a trainee would not have believed the experiences that I have had. When I first started covering women's sport, many people weren't terribly interested. The first time I realised that the women's game had progressed as much as it has was when England played at Wembley for the first time ever. Wembley Way is packed with supporters. We walked down there to get to the stadium, to turn around and look around that stadium, packed out. You do try to be impartial as a journalist, but I'm not ashamed to say I shed a tear on that day. They had achieved something every little girl now dreams of. Representation is incredibly important because you've got to see it to be it. I've been incredibly privileged to have had a front seat to watch women's sport grow into this incredible force. And now we've got the next generation waiting in the wings.
This is BBC News, live from the UN in New York. I'm Katrina Perry.
And I'm Matthew O'Meara here in London.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addresses the UN General Assembly a day after Donald Trump said Ukraine can win back its territory from Russia.
Stopping Putin now is cheaper than trying to protect every port and every ship from terrorists with sea drones.
More from New York, more from Kyiv in a moment or two. Our other main headlines here. A major breakthrough in the treatment of Huntington's disease. For the first time, a gene therapy has been shown to slow its progression. Overwhelmed and on the brink of collapse, we speak to some of the doctors at Gaza City's last functioning hospital. And the UK Home Secretary orders an urgent review after a BBC investigation finds some asylum seekers are being sent on taxi journeys costing hundreds of pounds.
Hello and welcome to the United Nations headquarters. Zelensky has just told the leaders gathered that his country is living through the most destructive arms race in human history. He warned nations that Russian President Vladimir Putin wanted to continue the war and expand it. He was speaking just a day after the US President Donald Trump flagged an apparent marked change of tone. He posted on social media to say, "I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form." Well, we'll be analysing all of that in just a moment, but first off, let's have a listen back to some of what Volodymyr Zelensky has been saying.
The facts are simple. Stopping this war now, and with it, the global arms race, is cheaper than building underground kindergartens or massive bunkers for critical infrastructure later. Stopping Putin now is cheaper than trying to protect every port and every ship from terrorists with sea drones. Stopping Russia now carrying a nuclear warhead. So we must use everything we have together to force the aggressor to stop. And only then do we have a real chance that this arms race will not end in catastrophe for all of us. If it takes weapons to do it, if it takes pressure on Russia, then it must be done. And it must be done now. Otherwise, Putin will keep driving the war forward wider and deeper. And we told you before, Ukraine is only the first, and now Russian drones are already flying across Europe, and Russian operations are already spreading across country. And Putin wants to continue this war by expanding it, and no one can feel safe right now.
So just some of the stark words that the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said here just a few moments ago. Well, let's talk through a little more of what he did say. I'm joined by our North America correspondent, Neda Tawfik. Neda, there's lots there, but a very stark warning about this arms race that President Zelensky warning the world will suffer from if Russia's not stopped.
Yeah, and this is all part of his attempt to re-engage the international community in the Ukrainian struggle. He understands that there are other raging conflicts, that the global south has a bit of fatigue about hearing about Ukraine. The incursion into the airspace of other NATO members, Poland, Estonia, saying that this is well beyond an issue for just Ukraine. So again, we kind of heard him ending his statement saying, I had a good talk with President Trump. It's not just about friendships, it's about weapons, it's about pressure. Please do not be silent. All of you need to come and speak out against Russia and against the Russian President Vladimir Putin.
And on that point, he said twice, I think, there are no security guarantees for Ukraine. We have France and we have weapons, but that's it, and it's not enough.
Yeah, and there was an interesting point in there where he strategically mentioned the attempted assassination of President Trump, the killing of the right-wing activist Charlie Kirk, and also the Ukrainian woman who was killed that has become, you know, a real talking point of the administration as well. Because again, we saw the U.S. representatives there listening to the speech, nodding in agreement to that. So clearly he saw the change of tone from President Trump. He's trying to stay in his good graces, but making the larger point that unless there is more pressure on Russia, you know, this war will continue for many more years to come.
He echoed a little some of the criticism of the United Nations as a body that we heard from President Trump yesterday when he said words to the effect of, if you're in a war zone right now, you don't think that the United Nations is doing anything for you. And he named Afghanistan, he named Sudan, he named Palestine.
You know, questioning its relevance. And I think what he's really talking about, of course, is the UN Security Council. You know, there was a meeting on Ukraine scheduled in the UN Security Council yesterday. We heard the Secretary General, you know, talking about the bilateral talks that President Trump has been having with the Russian president and hoping that that would make progress despite how vicious the war continues to be, and saying that even though it's a fragile hope for peace, that he hopes that that will make progress, that won't completely escape this moment in the international community. So you have the Secretary General in the UN Security Council recognizing it's powerless to do anything, talking about these kind of talks between the US and Russia. So again, Volodymyr Zelensky expressing that dismay and hopelessness that he and his people feel that the international community is not doing enough.
He didn't mention at all, really, the prospect of peace talks or ceasefires or negotiations, any of that. It was all about weapons, that kind of strength is what will stop Russia.
Actions as defensive and Russia as the aggressor. And that's important to him because, you know, we have seen actually over the last few years some countries, you know, expressing that Russia itself has its own security concerns and that those should also be addressed. And so he wants to make a very clear line here about who is the aggressor and who is the victim. And so that's why throughout this speech, you know, he warned that what Russia is doing, in his view, should be outrightly and very clearly condemned, talking about, you know, in the future you might have AI and drones going after each other as well. Like, you need to take this threat seriously because it could be you next.
Okay. Neda Tawfik, thank you very much. Lots more still to come, of course, here at the UN, and lots more to discuss about what President Zelensky said there and how other countries will respond to it. Matthew?
Katrina, before you go, let me just talk a little more about that social media post from Donald Trump that's got so much attention overnight in terms of your reading of that, because at different stages the president has said if he can't end this war, he's prepared to walk away, because there is a worry, isn't there, that in a sense he could leave the warring parties to it.
There's a very big sense of that, Matthew. I mean, I will put the caveat in that one Truth Social post from President Trump does not a policy make, and we have seen him change his stance so today, which he talked about just very recently, how he feels disappointed and let down that his strong relationship with Vladimir Putin has failed on this occasion, and he hasn't been able to do that. But just a few months ago, he was saying to President Zelensky, it may be that you just have to siege parts of your country, that may be where this ends up, that those parts that are occupied by Russia will have to stay occupied by Russia, which obviously is completely unacceptable to President Zelensky and indeed to many other nations as well. So he's come all the way from that position to that post yesterday, not only saying he thinks Ukraine, with the assistance of the European Union, very important clause in there, did not say and us, just the European Union, could take back all of its land and even some more. Now, I'm not sure anyone, possibly even including the Ukrainians, thinks that they can themselves take some of Russia's territory, and that's not what they're seeking at this point. They want their own land back. But very interesting to sort of chart and track where President Trump has been on this issue. But his action is the key thing. And I think that's what President Zelensky was getting at there when he repeatedly said the security guarantees are France and weapons. And we need more than that, essentially. And we need that level of engagement here. And President Trump, even in his speech yesterday, did threaten exactly what you're saying, Matthew. He said, there's an ocean between the US and this conflict. Could step away.
Katrina, plenty more from you through the next few hours. Thanks so much for now. That's Katrina Berry live for us there at the UN. We'll be live in Kyiv here on the programme in a moment or two. We're going to take a short break first. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. Welcome back to BBC News. We were just listening to Ukraine's president there at the UN. So let's head to Kyiv and to James Wardhouse, who was also listening. And James, it was fascinating because we heard from President Zelensky talking about how Vladimir Putin wanted to extend this war, underlining the wider threat, not just to Ukraine, talking about the warnings too around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, but also talking about how the development of drones had fundamentally reshaped warfare. What was your analysis of what you heard just now?
Well, Matthew, in the past, Zelensky has used these moments on a global stage to inject urgency, to try and make the war in his country resonate further. And you felt this time around he had a bit more evidence to play with. He's argued in the past that Putin doesn't want to stop at Ukraine should he succeed here. And now, in the last few weeks, we've seen Russian incursions into Estonian airspace with 3 fighter jets should shoot down Russian aircraft if they do it again. So I think he's got a bit more to play with, but he also had to remind people, I think that's also a geopolitical reality for him. He talked about having to funnel his country's funds into building underground schools and repairing transport networks or power grids that are under continued attack, and not on developing cities like other countries are able to do so. He also talked about the evolution of weaponry. And then he pivoted, and I thought this was interesting. He pivoted into the sell, into the transaction. There are reports that Ukraine and the US are looking to jointly produce weapons into the long term. We're seeing that across Europe, and perhaps he's trying to extend that to a broader base. The Russian delegation were there. We understand that they didn't really make eye contact. In fact, on Russian state TV, they posted a picture saying President Zelensky was talking to an empty room. I mean, wasn't the audience that Donald Trump had yesterday, but it was still sizable. There was a round of applause at the end. But I think the Ukrainian president had more to work with this time around. The question is whether he was listened to.
James, give me a sense of what it is like to be there, because it was so interesting listening to President Zelensky talking about the threats from drones almost every single day, not just in the cities but elsewhere. And yet we've seen Ukraine also very successful.
Yes, I mean, at the moment, I think we've been away for a few weeks, and when we came back, I think we were struck by the deteriorating situation for Ukraine. You've got a pocket of these eastern cities in the Donetsk region where they're now almost too dangerous to go to. These are places we've frequently visited over the past few years. The front line is now this vast, porous swathe of territory where you have pockets of isolated soldiers trying to hold what they've got. You have drones swarming the sky, and as you say, you have this sort of ongoing drone warfare. The sirens have not really stopped over the past couple of weeks. The numbers of drones being launched by Russia are frequently in the hundreds, and yes, we've seen Ukraine in turn successfully hit Russian oil refineries, which are being felt by some portions of the Russian population. But Ukraine will lose first in this war of attrition. Try to strengthen his country's position as much as possible, or at least not let it weaken further, to try and avoid any kind of Russian compromises. It is notable that Donald Trump has changed his tone in such a dramatic way, but I think for the troops fighting and the people living in these embattled cities, until those words are coupled with action, which they haven't broadly been yet, then focuses will understandably shift to the ongoing demands of this full-scale invasion in its fourth year.
Yes, that is always the caveat after we hear words from Donald Trump. Jay, there in Kyiv, thanks very much for that, and plenty more from the UN, of course, on that story through the course of our programme. But I want to turn for the next few minutes to an astonishing development, because researchers say they've successfully treated one of the cruelest and most devastating diseases, Huntington's, for the first time. It runs through families, relentlessly kills brain cells, and resembles a combination of dementia, Parkinson's and motor neuron disease. Here's our medical editor, Fergus Walsh.
Jack May Davis knows that without treatment, he is guaranteed to develop the same relentless condition as killed his father, Huntington's disease. Caused by a faulty gene, it destroys brain cells and affects the whole body. Jack's father, Fred, first developed symptoms in his late 30s, and eventually needed round-the-clock care. He died aged 54.
Yeah, it was really, you know, it would be me at some point.
So, Lucy, if you look here, you can see...
But now there is hope. A trial of a gene therapy slowed the progression of Huntington's disease by 75% over 3 years. Scientists involved in the research at University College London described the results as spectacular.
I am absolutely thrilled and excited that we now have a potential treatment for this truly devastating disorder. And what the data means is that for a person who has Huntington's disease, they will be able to maintain their function longer. They'll be able to stay and work longer. They'll be able to support their families longer. They'll be able to be independent. So it will give them more years of living a good quality of life.
Here you can see the gene therapy being injected deep into the brain of one of the 29 patients on the trial. The surgery takes more than 12 hours, but is a one-off treatment. The drug, called AMT-30, enters cells in the brain, releasing its genetic material. This lowers levels of a toxic protein and slows progress of the disease. This gene therapy represents a stunning breakthrough in Huntington's disease. And there is hope that this experimental treatment will be licensed perhaps as soon as next year.
And so here is a picture of your brain, which I'm pleased to tell you looks fantastic.
Jack, who's 30, is part of a Huntington's research group in London. The team hope that patients like him could eventually be given the treatment to prevent them ever falling ill. Has it in some ways
knowing that I have got more time here than perhaps I first thought?
If approved, the drug is certain to be very expensive. Another gene therapy costs over £2 million. But for researchers and for Huntington disease families, this is the breakthrough they have dreamed of for years. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Well, it is an astonishing development. Through the course of today's programme, we'll talk live to Fergus Walsh. Will also talk to the lead researcher in that programme who you saw there in the piece, and we'll also talk in the next hour to someone with Huntington's. So all of that coming up on today's Verified Live. Well, let's stay with medical breakthroughs, because a new deal has been announced to significantly decrease the price of a key piece of HIV preventative medicine. Bill Clinton helped broker it. It involved negotiations with drug companies on the price. The details from Johannesburg. Here's our Africa correspondent, Naomi Jones.
This drug, many scientists believe, will revolutionize the way HIV is prevented around the world, not just in the developing world. It's meant to be, as you mentioned in your introduction, a shot that's taken twice a year. At the moment, if you think you might be at risk of contracting HIV, you take PrEP, a pill, but you are meant to take it 7 days before you think you might be exposed. And for many people, they're not always sure when they are at risk of taking HIV, in which case they'd have to take 2 pills a day. And for a lot of people, particularly in the developing world, those pills are hard to access. They might forget to take them. So the idea with this twice yearly shot is you take them, you take 1 shot, you're covered for 6 months, and then you take another shot and you're covered for another 6 months. So this announcement today that this medication that originally is meant to cost $28,000 per year per person is now going to be available in 2027 for $40, 0.1%, or that amount is huge for countries like here in South Africa, where rates of HIV are extremely high.
Now, hospitals in Gaza say Israeli fire has killed more than 50 people since dawn. Many of those killed were displaced people sheltering in a building and tents in and around Gaza City. The Israeli military says it struck what it called 2 Hamas terrorists in the northern Gaza. Information on the number of casualties. Israel's forces are continuing to advance into the city. Well, doctors at Gaza's biggest hospital have told the BBC they are overwhelmed with casualties and having to carry out surgeries with little or no anaesthetics and in filthy conditions. Israeli tanks are now just 500 metres from the Al-Shifa hospital in the centre of Gaza City as the operation against Hamas continues. John Donaldson reports now from the Israel-Gaza border, and a warning: you may find some of the details in his report distressing.
This is what's left of the last functioning hospital in Gaza City. Barely functioning, with the war raging outside. Inside Al-Shifa, many of the beds don't even have mattresses. The casualties are endless. This is 13-year-old Mohammed. He's now partially paralysed after being hit by an Israeli strike. Treating him are volunteer Australian doctors Sayed Aziz and Nada Abu Aroub.
It's just a mass murder.
Access to Gaza, but we managed to speak to them from just across the border.
We did operations with hardly to minimal to hardly no anesthesia.
So the patients are in agony?
Yes, of course, yes, and there's no painkillers as well. With their limb hanging with a piece of skin and the tendon, brain matter out, abdomen organs are out. It's horrific.
Last week, the team say they had to give a cesarean to a 9-month pregnant woman who had had her head blown off. They managed to save the baby.
Literally every couple of hours, there's multiple amputation cases where massive resuscitation is life or limb, literally. And you go in and you're trying to anaesthetize him. They're swatting flies in theatre.
But there's endless work to be done. Outside, Israel's tanks are advancing. They're now just 500 meters from the hospital as the ground see and hear the war. People here at a special viewing point can pay to watch it unfold on a long lens.
Gaza City is just a few miles away, but it's a world apart. And as Israel's operation continues, it's being pounded. The airstrikes can be heard from as far as 50 miles away.
And almost 2 years into this war, the two sides seem as distanced as ever, and both with entirely different perspectives. John Donnison, BBC News, on the Gaza-Israel border.
Well, before we break, I just want to take you briefly live to NASA headquarters in Houston, where the crew of Artemis 2 are giving a news conference. It's the mission that aims to land astronauts on the moon and eventually develop a base there. They just moved to a Q&A session. Do head to the BBC website because you can see continuous coverage from that news conference. Just click onto the relevant page. I'll be back with headlines in just a moment.